these low carb, high fat, Atkins type people are just plain and simple liars. You know, that's a word we can use these days, isn't it? Back when you and I started, we would never call somebody a liar or a crook or a thief.
Regrettably, it seems to be a word that we're using more often than we used to.
You know what? I think it's appropriate. Why don't we just cut the speed and not say things like, well, maybe he's misinformed. He's a damn liar is what he is. I don't know why these low carbers are doing it. And it's not just the low carbers. You know, if you watch the journals in terms of medical therapies, devices, heart surgeries, medications, and so on, these people who are publishing in the journals and the scientists who are doing, quote, research are being caught left and right. You noticing that?
Yes. Well, I know exactly what you mean. And here's a concern that I have about low-carb diets that I think people often don't recognize. A person goes on a low-carb diet and they lose weight, which is not surprising because carbohydrates are about half of what your average person eats. If you take out all the fruit and all the bread and all the pasta and all the beans and all the sweet potatoes, and if you don't replace them with calories, you will lose weight, and that happens. But as you know, what you're left with is typically meat. There's chicken, there's fish, and egg whites and so forth left in the diet. And normally when a person loses weight, really almost no matter how they lose weight, their cholesterol will fall. On average, maybe about a point off your total cholesterol per pound of body weight that you lose. Except if the way you lost weight was on a low carb diet, what we see is about a third of people, despite the fact that they're losing weight because they're kind of starving it off, about a third of people have their cholesterol levels go up, sometimes massively. And you've seen this where their cholesterol levels go really high. And that's because they're suddenly they're not eating the high fiber foods, and instead they're eating meat and sometimes cheese and other things like that. So I really encourage people to not go on this low carb route. And if they do go on it, they end up often disappointed anyway. It's better to start with the foods that your body really was designed for.
Right. Even Atkins reports 70% of his patients had constipation, and about a similar amount had halitosis. And, the studies, and your group has done some of them to counteract the low carbs. In fact, that brings to mind something you and I did together. Do you remember when Atkins died? And a year and a half.
I was afraid you're going to bring that up. Yes.
Yeah, we got in a little trouble for that, didn't we? Going on CNN, New York Times, and I don't know.
Yes.
All the major newspapers, and you were kind enough to split the duties with me, and also punishment for bringing out the fact that when Atkins died, he was obese, and he had extensive artery disease, which he lied about on the Larry King show, whereas his wife, after his death, put his angiograms up, which showed extensive atherosclerosis. Sad to say, I don't have those angiograms anymore, thanks to a fire. But, he just plain and simple lied about it. And
it was a troubling thing.
The point is, you and I went out on a massive campaign together, and we got almost all the media's attention worldwide, including the New York Times and so on. And we told it clearly, this is a fat, sick guy.
It was a troubling situation because Atkins had really gone through quite a resurgence, and people were going left and right onto this Atkins diet. And it was a typical low-carb diet where they were hoping that they would lose weight. And over the short run, many people did lose weight. But he promised them that all the butter and meat that they were eating would not hurt their heart. And what he had hidden was the fact that he himself had heart disease. And when he died, he had an autopsy that was performed. And the autopsy results were released to a doctor named Fleming who lived in the Midwest. And Dr. Fleming sent me this report and said, people ought to know that he had coronary artery disease and that he was obese, and because he's been promising that people will lose weight and be thin on this healthy diet. And so we, here at the Physicians Committee, we weighed this situation. We decided that the media ought to be aware of this. And so we did release this report. And we had to weigh this quite a bit because this was an autopsy report that was a technical report, and it would have it wasn't a medical chart or anything like that. but we did make the decision to release it. And I think on balance, it was the right thing to do. And it as you said, that people said, no, he couldn't possibly have had heart disease, but in fact he did. And
well, he lied about it. He lied on, I can remember on the Larry King show, him lying about having coronary artery disease. So,
yes. Yes, and this was in the days when people were less accustomed to hearing prominent people lie like they do now.
Yeah, it was not acceptable back then. That was 20 years ago. That was not acceptable. But today, it's a different story.
Unfortunately, but yes, that happened, and I'm happy to say that since that time, I think people have taken a much more jaded view of low carb diets, but they still don't go away. They sometimes remind me of the cicadas that are in the trees here in Washington. Every 17 years, they come out of the ground and then they make a lot of noise in the trees, and then they go back into the ground for another 17 years. And while they're in the ground, they write books about low carb diets. And 17 years later, they come back with another one. So it was whatever the low carb diet was in the 50s, and then Atkins came up, and then after that it was South Beach, and then it was ketogenic diets. But they all have this idea that you shouldn't eat carbohydrates. But the problem, of course, is, as you've written about so eloquently, if you look at the most healthful, longest-lived populations, they have high carbohydrate intakes, and they always have a starch food that is their staple, like in Okinawa, the sweet potatoes, or in other parts of Japan, it might be rice. And even in the United States, the longest-lived populations are the Adventists, who are eating plant-based diets, either completely or mostly. So anyhow, the low-carb diet seems not to go away, just like any other kind of quick fix, but luckily the evidence supporting a healthier approach is really quite robust.